Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Obviously, this orchid had an accident, so I had to do an emergency repot. At first, I was really angry at myself, but then I think as a YouTuber, whenever there was something, right, I went ahead and grabbed my camera and took a couple photos because I wanted to share what happened with you, as well as the repot. But let's go back in time because I want to give you a full story of this orchid, how it came to my place, when it came, and how long it has bloomed to where it completely finished its bloom. Okay, so mid-April 2018, I bought this orchid from my local grocery store, Trader Joe's. It continued to bloom for about a month and a half, so it's around beginning of June 2018 that this orchid start to show signs of fading its flower. And I suspect that this orchid is close to primary hybrid, even though it does not have fragrance. But just by the way the flowers look, I suspect that it's pretty close to primary hybrids. Okay, so August 23rd, 2018 was when this orchid was repotted, and then the spike continued to remain green. Toward the end of 2018, it started to put out more buds from the existing spike, and then it started to, it continued to bloom, through January to February to now already March 10th, 2019. And then it carried on with those blooms until end of June. And that's when the flowers started to look a little pale, so I know that they were on their way out. So July 10th was when the last flower dropped. So from November 10th, 2018 to July 10th, this is a total of 8 months period that this orchid always had some flower. So that was quite amazing. And of course, I kept the spike until it completely yellowed and browned and dried. Usually I wait until, then to cut the flower spike. Otherwise, I would keep the flower spike for as long as it's green. And if you're new to this orchid hobby, if the flower spike is green, I don't recommend that you cut it. You should keep it, because if it's a sequential bloomer, it may continue to elongate to give you more blooms, right? So we can talk a little bit about that later. Now, looking at the photo or video, my accident happened on July 28th, 2019. What happened was I was trying to grab another orchid, but I accidentally bumped into this orchid and then knocked it off my growing shelf. So everything was just on the floor. I was really furious, mad at myself, until I looked at the roots. I was like, okay, this orchid is not doing too bad. I knew it was fine. I mean, if it weren't for this little mini accident, I would not have repotted this orchid because it was doing just fine in semi-hydro. At the time, it was also growing a new leaf, and you can see that the roots were also trying to grow longer, right? And there's active root tip as well. But at the time, the spike was pretty much dried up completely, pretty much dried. So I knew I wanted to cut it from the very base. I don't need to keep the spike longer than it needs to be, because I would never handle this particular orchid from the flower spike, because it's in semi-hydro, right? If I pull it by the spike, the whole plant would come out. So this is the finished product. But now, one thing I do have to tell you, this repot is not the traditional conventional repot method that I follow, because I simply scoop up the media on the floor and reuse it. I didn't spray down the roots with hydrogen peroxide. I didn't allow a 24-hour drying period, because this orchid was okay to begin with. I didn't see any pest or any issue with the media or with the roots. So it was just a pure mini boo-boo, mini accident that happened that this orchid had to be out of the pot, so I just planted it back in as if nothing happened. I did somewhat adjust the orchid a little bit just so that it's not tilting too all the way downwards, but I know it's still gonna happen no matter what, because most orchids, even for your orchids, right, in your environment, it's always, the sunlight is always coming through a window, always come in at an angle. Unless you are growing your orchids directly under the light, then your orchids may be less likely to grow pendant, right? Otherwise, they'll keep leaning because they always grow toward the sun. So there will always be an angle if your light source is not directly coming from above. Now, I want to go back to the whole why green flower spikes should not be cut. You should keep those, right? Like I said earlier, if it's a sequential bloomer, it may continue to grow. And because if you don't know for sure if it's a sequential bloomer or not, I recommend that you keep it until you figure it out. Number two, even if it doesn't bloom from the nodes, it may grow cakey or secondary spike when the time and conditions are completely matching, right? Or if this orchid needs additional nutrients, I believe whatever juice or sap in the spike can be recycled back into the plant by the plant itself. So for all these reasons, if flower spikes are green, you really shouldn't cut it, right? So for this orchid, I also do use an outer cup because in semi-hydro, it's very easy to have algae formed inside the cup. So in a way, this outer cup, it's not only serving the decorative purposes, but also is used to block out additional sunlight. Okay, fast forward, we now at October 16, 2019. So it's about, just shy of 2 months since the accident, since the repot. And you can already see the roots have grown even more since. It was already in active growth, and in my environment, it was still pretty hot then, so I know this orchid will not have any problem, picking it right up with its growth. And the best case scenario is what you're seeing here, right? Roots are growing down into the reservoir area, so that gives me a great flexibility in terms of controlling the amount of water I give to this orchid versus having to always fill up the reservoir to the drainage hole level, right? So every time I give this orchid, for example, quarter cup, that would actually fill up the reservoir to about 50%, maybe just a little less than 50%. And that's enough for this orchid to stay hydrated and allow a wet-dry cycle of about 7 days or so. And that is really good. And 7 days wet-dry cycle is for summertime. I mean, in winter time, it would usually be a little longer, say about 10 to 14 days, depending on the temperature as well as my humidity in the winter time. Some people may probably wonder why I continue to use semi-hydro. I did have an opportunity to change a growing method, but because this orchid has always been really good or doing really well in this particular method and never show any kind of need for adjustment. Like this orchid never actually had to adjust. It just continued to grow and grow. The first repot that I did last year was the case. So I know this orchid works really well with semi-hydro. The only difference that I did this time is at the reservoir area, I used bigger pebble, and then it's above the drainage hole level that I started to introduce smaller pebble. And then as the level goes higher and higher, I use more smaller pebbles to seal up the top. But still, I mean, the ratio is still about 2 to 1. 2 parts bigger pebble, the hydrocorn, and then 1 part manto clay small pebble. This orchid received quarter strength fertilizer every single time, and once a month I do use just water, reverse osmosis water, to soak this orchid entirely and then drain out all water. I don't even keep water in the reservoir during that particular watering cycle to allow complete dryness. Overall, I think that mini accident was a blessing in disguise. Now that we have repotted this orchid and it's continued to doing well, I have no doubt that this orchid will grow and hopefully bloom again for us next year. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!